I will never forget the feeling of standing alone at that Interstate 75 rest stop in Georgia at 6 a.m., watching my family's black SUV disappear around the curve without me. The morning mist hung thick in the air, and the only sounds were distant trucks rumbling past and my own ragged breathing. 22 years of being their daughter, their little sister, and they had just driven away, like I was nothing more than unwanted baggage. My heart hammered against my ribs as the reality hit me like a freight train. This was not some cruel joke or misunderstanding. This was real, and I was completely alone. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you have ever felt abandoned by the people you trusted most. Subscribe because this story will show you how sometimes the worst betrayal can lead to the greatest transformation of your life. But first, let me take you back to how this nightmare began and how it became the best thing that ever happened to me. To understand how I ended up stranded at that rest stop, you need to know about my family. We were 6 people living in a modest 2-story house in Nashville, Tennessee. Dad worked as a mechanical engineer at a manufacturing plant, pulling in decent money, while Mom worked part-time as a registered nurse at the local hospital. To the outside world, we looked like the perfect middle-class American family. But inside our house, I was always the odd one out. My 3 older siblings had followed the path my parents laid out perfectly. Marcus, 28, had his MBA and worked in corporate finance. Diana, 26, was a successful dental hygienist with her own practice. Kyle, 24, had just finished law school and landed a position at a prestigious firm downtown. Then there was me, Nora, the 22-year-old black sheep, who had just graduated with a degree in fine arts photography. While my siblings collected paychecks and career achievements, I collected vintage cameras and spent hours capturing the beauty in abandoned buildings and forgotten street corners. My parents saw this as a phase something I would grow out of once reality hit. They had been patient for 4 years of college, assuming I would eventually see sense and switch to something practical like business or nursing. When I walked across that graduation stage with my photography degree, their patience ran out. The tension in our house had been building for months before that fateful trip. Every family dinner became a battlefield where my parents would launch carefully aimed attacks at my chosen career path. They would ask pointed questions about my future plans, my financial stability, and my ability to support myself. When I would defend my passion for photography, they would exchange those looks that parents give each other when they think their child is being naive and foolish. The breaking point came when I announced that I had been accepted into a photography internship program in Atlanta. It was an unpaid position, but it would give me the professional experience and connections I needed to build my career. My parents were horrified. Dad slammed his coffee mug down so hard that the handle broke off. Mom started crying and asking where they'd gone wrong as parents. Marcus called me selfish and irresponsible. Diana just shook her head in disappointment. Only Kyle remained quiet, but his silence felt just as condemning as the others' words. That is when Dad issued his ultimatum. I had 2 choices: enroll in business school and get a real degree that would lead to a stable career, or move out and fend for myself without any family support. He gave me 1 week to decide. The Florida trip to visit my maternal grandparents was supposed to be my opportunity to think things over and hopefully come to my senses surrounded by family love and wisdom. The car ride to Florida was 8 hours of pure tension. I sat in the back seat next to Kyle, staring out the window while my parents and Marcus discussed my future, as if I was not even there. They talked about intervention strategies and tough love approaches. Diana occasionally chimed in with stories about friends whose artistic children had eventually found practical careers after their dreams crashed and burned. The air conditioning could not compete with the suffocating atmosphere of disappointment and frustration that filled every inch of that SUV. We stopped for gas about an hour before reaching the rest stop that would change my life forever. While Dad filled the tank, I went inside to buy a soda and stretch my legs. When I came back out, I could see my family huddled together near the car, having what looked like an intense discussion. They stopped talking abruptly when they saw me approaching. Mom's eyes were red like she had been crying. Marcus looked angry. Diana would not meet my eyes. Kyle seemed conflicted, like he wanted to say something, but did not dare. Back on the road, the silence was deafening. No one spoke for the next hour except for Dad giving directions to Mom, who was navigating. I dozed off somewhere along the way, emotionally exhausted from months of fighting and feeling like I was disappointing everyone I loved. I woke up when the car came to a stop at the rest stop. My bladder was full, and I needed to use the restroom urgently. I mumbled something about needing the bathroom and climbed out of the car, grabbing my small purse from the floor. The rest stop was nearly empty, except for a few long-haul truckers catching some sleep in their cabs. I walked into the concrete building, used the facilities, and splashed some cold water on my face. In the mirror, I looked tired and defeated. I took a few extra minutes to compose myself, knowing I would have to get back in that car and endure several more hours of silent judgment. When I pushed through the heavy glass door and walked back to where our car had been parked, there was nothing but empty asphalt. For a moment, I thought I had gotten confused about the location. I walked around the entire parking area, checking behind every building and structure. Our black SUV was nowhere to be seen. Panic started rising in my chest as I searched frantically, calling out for my family. That is when I found the note. It was tucked under a rock on one of the concrete picnic tables near where our car had been parked. The handwriting was Marcus's, and it contained only 8 words that would haunt me for years. Learn to take care of yourself like you wanted. I read those words over and over, hoping they would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper. I ran back to the parking lot thinking maybe I had missed them somehow. Maybe they were just playing a cruel joke and would come back laughing at their own cleverness. But the minutes ticked by and the parking lot remained empty except for the trucks and my own growing hysteria. The reality of my situation hit me like a physical blow. I had no phone because it was charging in the car. I had no identification because my driver's license was in my wallet, which was in my larger purse in the car. I had no credit cards, no debit card, no way to access money or call for help. All I had were the clothes on my back and $12 in cash that I had stuck in my pocket earlier for vending machine snacks. I sat on that concrete picnic table as the sun came up, fully watching other travelers come and go, and tried to process what had just happened. My own family had abandoned me at a highway rest stop like I was a stray dog they no longer wanted to care for. The people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had coordinated this plan and executed it while I was using the bathroom. The betrayal cut deeper than any argument or ultimatum ever could. The first night was the longest of my life. The rest stop technically closed at 10 p.m., but there was no gate or fence to keep people out. The security lighting stayed on, and truck drivers continued to use the facility throughout the night. I found a spot behind the building where there was a concrete bench, and I curled up on it using my lightweight jacket as a blanket. Every sound made me jump. Every set of headlights that turned into the parking lot made my heart race with hope that it might be my family coming back for me. But they never came. As the sun rose on my second day of abandonment, I knew I had to stop waiting and start surviving. My $12 would not last long, and I needed to find food, shelter, and most importantly, a way to earn money. The rest stop had vending machines, but at $2 per item, I would be broke within a week if that was my only food source. I walked to the nearby truck stop diner and asked to speak with the manager. The woman who came out was probably in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her name tag read, Mrs. Patterson. I told her I was stranded and desperate for work, any kind of work. I did not mention my family abandoning me because I was too ashamed and afraid she might think I was lying or trying to scam her. Mrs. Patterson looked me up and down, taking in my rumpled clothes in obvious distress. She asked me a few questions about my experience and availability. When I told her I would work any hours for any wage, something in her expression softened. She said she needed someone to help during the morning rush and could pay me minimum wage plus tips if I could start immediately. I nearly cried with relief. She put me to work that very morning, teaching me how to operate the coffee machines, take orders, and serve food. The work was harder than anything I had ever done before. My feet ached from standing on the concrete floors, my hands got burned by hot plates and coffee pots, and dealing with grumpy truckers and impatient travelers tested every ounce of patience I possessed. But it was work, and it meant I could eat and maybe find a real place to sleep. When Mrs. Patterson learned that I was sleeping at the rest stop, she offered to let me stay in the small storage room behind the diner until I could get on my feet. It was not much more than a closet with a cot and a sink, but it felt like a palace compared to that concrete bench. She said I could stay there in exchange for doing extra cleaning and prep work after hours. Those first few weeks tested every fiber of my being. I worked 12-hour days at the diner, then spent my evenings applying for better jobs and looking for affordable apartments. Everything required identification, credit history references, and other documentation that I did not have. I had to go through the bureaucratic nightmare of replacing my driver's license without having any of my original documents. I had to open a bank account with just my social security number and the temporary ID the DMV provided. The hardest part was not the physical exhaustion or even the uncertainty about my future. The hardest part was the emotional devastation of being thrown away by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I would lie on that cot at night staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how my own family could coordinate such a cruel plan. I wondered if they felt any guilt or regret. I wondered if they missed me at all. But slowly, day by day, I started to rebuild not just my circumstances, but my sense of self. Mrs. Patterson became more than an employer. She became a mentor and the closest thing to family I had. She taught me practical skills like budgeting and dealing with difficult customers, but she also reminded me daily that I had value and deserved respect. When I would get overwhelmed or start to doubt myself, she would sit me down with a cup of coffee and remind me how far I had come. After 3 months of sleeping in the storage room and working every available shift, I had saved enough money to rent a small efficiency apartment about 2 miles from the diner. It was a tiny space in a building that had seen better decades, but it was mine. I had a real bed, a small kitchen, and most importantly, an address that I could put on job applications. I started picking up a second job doing cleaning services for a local company that serviced office buildings at night. The work was mindless, but peaceful, and it doubled my income. I would work at the diner from 5 a.m. until 2 p.m. sleep for a few hours, then clean offices from 7 p.m. until midnight. It was exhausting, but every paycheck brought me closer to real independence. During my rare free hours, usually on Sunday afternoons, I would walk around town with a disposable camera I had bought at the pharmacy. I could not afford a real camera yet, but I needed to keep that part of myself alive somehow. I took pictures of interesting architecture, street art, and candid moments of small town life. When I got the film developed, I was surprised by how good some of the images were, even with the cheap camera and amateur processing. One Sunday, I was walking around the area near the rest stop where my old life had ended. I found myself drawn back to that place repeatedly, not out of nostalgia, but because it represented something important about my journey. As the sun was setting, I took a picture of the rest stop with the highway stretching out behind it. The image captured something powerful about journeys and new beginnings that I could not quite put into words at the time. When I had that roll of film developed, the rest stop photo stood out immediately. There was something hauntingly beautiful about the empty parking lot, bathed in golden light with the promise of distant horizons visible in the background. On impulse, I took the photo to the local newspaper office and asked if they might be interested in purchasing it for their travel section. The editor, a man named David Chen, looked at the photo for a long time before asking me about my background and training. When I told him about my photography degree, he seemed surprised that someone with formal training was working at a truck stop diner. He bought the photo for $50, which felt like a fortune to me at the time. More importantly, he gave me his business card and told me to bring him more images if I had them. That $50 sale planted a seed that would eventually grow into everything I had dreamed of. I started spending my Sunday afternoons taking photos specifically for the newspaper, focusing on local events, interesting people, and hidden corners of beauty in our small Georgia town. David began buying 1 or 2 photos per month, and eventually he started assigning me small photography jobs for the paper. As my second year of independence began, I had managed to scrape together enough money to buy a used Canon camera from a pawn shop. It was not the professional equipment I had trained on in college, but it was a real camera that allowed me to capture images with the quality and control I needed. I started building a small portfolio of work that went beyond the snapshots I'd been taking with disposable cameras. Word of my photography skills started spreading through the small network of local businesses. I got my first wedding photography gig when Mrs. Patterson recommended me to her nephew, who was getting married on a tight budget. The pay was modest, but it was my first real photography client, and the experience reminded me why I had fallen in love with capturing important moments in people's lives. That wedding led to 2 more weddings, which led to family portrait sessions and graduation photos. I was still working both of my other jobs, but slowly photography income started to supplement and eventually replace the cleaning service work. By the end of my second year in Georgia, I was working at the diner only part-time and spending most of my energy building my photography business. I met Sam during this period when he hired me to assist him on a large wedding shoot. Sam was a freelance photographer who had been working in the Atlanta market for over a decade. He saw potential in my work and started bringing me on as a second shooter for his bigger events. More importantly, he became a mentor who taught me the business side of photography that they had never covered in art school. Sam showed me how to price my services appropriately, how to write contracts that protected both me and my clients, and how to market my work effectively. He also introduced me to other professionals in the industry and helped me understand the competitive landscape I was entering. Under his guidance, I started charging what my work was actually worth, instead of undervaluing myself out of desperation. The third year brought steady growth. I was booking enough photography work to quit the diner completely, though Mrs. Patterson and I remained close friends. I rented a small studio space in town and started offering portrait sessions in addition to event photography. My client base expanded beyond local families to include small businesses that needed product photography and headshots. I also started dating Jake during this time. He was a teacher at the local high school who had hired me to photograph the school's theater production. Jake was patient, kind, and completely supportive of my career goals. He understood that I was building something important and never pressured me to prioritize our relationship over my professional development. For the first time since being abandoned, I started to believe that I could trust someone completely. By my fourth year in Georgia, I had established myself as one of the top photographers in the region. I was booking destination weddings, corporate events, and editorial assignments that paid well enough for me to save significant money for the first time in my life. I bought a reliable car, moved to a nicer apartment, and invested in professional equipment that rivaled what I had trained on in college. The success felt surreal sometimes. I would look around my studio or count my business income and remember that scared 22-year-old girl sleeping on a cot behind a diner. The transformation was not just financial or professional. I had become confident, self-reliant, and proud of what I had built from nothing. The family that had thrown me away because they thought I could not make it on my own had been proven completely wrong. My relationship with Jake deepened into something serious and committed. He proposed during my fifth year in Georgia, presenting me with a ring during a sunset photography session that he had secretly arranged. We started planning a wedding and talking about buying a house together. For the first time since being abandoned, I felt like I belonged somewhere and had people who truly valued me. It was during this period of happiness and success that my past came crashing back into my life in the most unexpected way. I was editing photos in my studio on a Tuesday afternoon when my business phone rang. I answered professionally, expecting it to be a potential client or vendor. Instead, I heard a voice I had not heard in over 5 years. "Nora, is this really you? It is Marcus." The sound of my brother's voice sent a shock through my entire system. My hands started trembling, and I nearly dropped the phone. For a moment, I could not speak. All the pain and anger I had pushed down came flooding back, like a dam had burst inside my chest. "I know this is probably a surprise," Marcus continued when I did not respond. "But we have been trying to find you for a while now. We saw some of your photos in newspapers and magazines. You really made something of yourself. We always knew you would figure it out eventually. The casual tone of his voice, as if we had just talked last week instead of 5 years ago, as if they had not abandoned me at a highway rest stop, made my blood boil. But underneath the anger was a complex mix of emotions I was not prepared to deal with. Part of me still loved these people who had raised me. Part of me had always hoped they would realize their mistake and try to make amends. Marcus continued talking, but I could barely process his words through the emotional storm raging in my head. He was asking about my health, my business, my life, as if he had any right to that information after what they had done. He spoke like we were estranged siblings who had simply lost touch, not a family that had deliberately abandoned one of their own in a moment of calculated cruelty. The reason I am calling, Marcus said, his tone shifting slightly, is because we really need your help right now. Dad has been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The medical bills are crushing us, and he is not able to work anymore. Mom had to cut back her hours to take care of him. We have maxed out credit cards, taken loans against retirement accounts, and we are still drowning in debt. I listened in stunned silence as he outlined the family's financial crisis. Diana had closed her dental practice because she could not afford the malpractice insurance renewal. Kyle's law firm had downsized, and he was working contract jobs that barely covered his student loans. The family home was facing foreclosure. They had exhausted every option they could think of, which is when they started researching what had happened to me. "We know you have built a successful business," Marcus said. "We have seen your work featured in publications, and we know you must be doing well financially. We are not asking for charity. We just need someone in the family to help us through this crisis. $50,000 would cover Dad's treatment costs and get us caught up on the mortgage. We can pay you back once things stabilize." The number hit me like a physical blow. $50,000 was more money than they had ever offered to help me with anything. It was also money I actually had thanks to 5 years of careful saving and business growth. But the request felt like the ultimate insult after what they had done to me. "You want me to give you $50,000? I said, finally finding my voice. "After you abandoned me at a rest stop with $12 and no way to contact anyone? After you drove away while I was using the bathroom and left me stranded in a strange state with no identification, no phone, no way to get home?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice had a defensive edge. "That was a long time ago, Nora. We were trying to teach you about personal responsibility. It obviously worked because look where you are now. You learned to take care of yourself and you built something successful. In a way, we did you a favor by forcing you to become independent." The audacity of his statement took my breath away. They were trying to claim credit for my success while asking for money to bail them out of their failures. They had rewritten the narrative in their minds to make themselves the heroes of my story instead of the villains who had traumatized and abandoned me. I told Marcus I needed time to think about their request. He gave me his phone number and said they would be waiting to hear from me. After I hung up, I sat in my studio surrounded by photographs that represented years of hard work and personal growth, and I cried harder than I had since those first nights sleeping on a cot behind the diner. That evening, I told Jake about the phone call. He was furious on my behalf and could not believe they had the audacity to ask me for money after what they had done. He reminded me that I owed them nothing and suggested that giving them money would only enable their pattern of treating me poorly when convenient and ignoring me otherwise. I also talked to Sam, who had become like a big brother to me over the years. He was more measured in his response, but equally clear that I should not feel obligated to help people who had shown such cruelty when I needed them most. He pointed out that they had only reached out because they needed something, not because they felt genuine remorse for their actions. Mrs. Patterson, who had been more of a mother to me than my biological mother ever was the most direct in her advice. She said that real family does not abandon you when times get tough, and people who want forgiveness need to start by acknowledging what they did wrong and showing genuine remorse. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Marcus had not apologized once during our conversation. None of them had expressed regret for abandoning me or acknowledged the trauma they had caused. They wanted my money, but they did not want to take responsibility for their actions or repair the relationship they had broken. 3 days later, I called Marcus back. I told him I would consider helping with Dad's medical bills under certain conditions. First, all four of them would need to meet me in person to have a real conversation about what had happened 5 years ago. Second, they would need to acknowledge that abandoning me was wrong and offer sincere apologies. Third, they would need to meet Mrs. Patterson, the woman who had saved my life when they threw it away, and explain their actions to her face. Marcus was resistant to my conditions immediately. He said they did not have time for drama when Dad was dealing with cancer. He accused me of being petty and holding grudges, instead of focusing on family obligations. When I insisted that accountability was a prerequisite for any financial help, he became angry and started lecturing me about forgiveness and putting family first. His reaction told me everything I needed to know about their motivations and mindset. They wanted my money, but they did not want to face the consequences of their actions. They were willing to overlook the past because it was convenient for them now, but they were not willing to address the pain they had caused or make genuine amends. We agreed to meet the following Saturday at a coffee shop in Atlanta, halfway between their home in Tennessee and my life in Georgia. I drove up with Jake for moral support, though he waited in the car during the actual meeting. When I walked into that coffee shop and saw my parents and siblings sitting around a table, I was hit with a complex wave of emotions that I had not anticipated. They looked older, obviously stressed by their current financial crisis. Mom had gray hair now and lines around her eyes that had not been there 5 years ago. Dad looked thin and tired from his cancer treatment. My siblings looked like adults dealing with real-world pressures instead of the confident young professionals I remembered. But when they looked at me, I could see something else in their expressions. There was resentment mixed with their desperation. They were angry that they needed my help, angry that I had succeeded without them, angry that I was in a position to judge their past actions. They wanted my money, but they did not want to acknowledge that I had any right to set conditions on giving it to them. The conversation lasted 2 hours and confirmed my worst fears about their motivations. Mom cried and said she had missed me, but when I asked if she regretted abandoning me, she said they had done what they thought was best at the time. Dad barely spoke, but his expressions made it clear he still believed I had been too stubborn and unrealistic about my career choices. Diana apologized for the way things had happened, but immediately added that I had turned out fine, so maybe it was meant to be. Only Kyle seemed genuinely conflicted about what they had done. He admitted that he had felt terrible about leaving me at the rest stop and had argued against it when they were planning it. But even his apology felt incomplete because he had still participated in abandoning me and had never tried to contact me afterward to make sure I was safe. When I brought up my condition about meeting Mrs. Patterson, they flatly refused. Marcus said it would be humiliating and unnecessary. Mom said it was cruel of me to want to embarrass them in front of strangers. They could not understand that Mrs. Patterson was not a stranger to me, but the closest thing to real family I had found since they had thrown me away. Their refusal to acknowledge the full impact of their actions or show genuine accountability made my decision clear. I told them I would not be providing financial assistance. I explained that real family does not abandon each other during difficult times, and people who want help from family should start by treating family members with respect and dignity. The reaction was swift and ugly. Marcus accused me of being vindictive and selfish. Mom started crying and said I was letting my father die out of spite. Diana said I was punishing them for trying to help me become independent. Kyle remained quiet, but his silence felt like agreement with the others. I stood up to leave, and Marcus grabbed my arm. He told me I would regret this decision when Dad died, and I realized I could have helped save him. He said they would make sure everyone in our extended family knew how I had turned my back on them in their time of greatest need. The threats felt like confirmation that I was making the right choice. Walking out of that coffee shop was one of the hardest and most liberating moments of my life. In the car afterward, Jake held me while I cried out 5 years of accumulated pain, anger, and confusion. But underneath those difficult emotions was a growing sense of clarity and peace. I had faced my past and chosen my future based on my own values instead of their manipulation. The phone call started within days of our meeting. Marcus called repeatedly, alternating between angry demands and emotional manipulation. Mom left crying voicemails about Dad's deteriorating condition and my moral obligations as a daughter. Diana sent text messages calling me heartless and selfish. Only Kyle maintained his silence, which I interpreted as a sign that he understood my position, even if he could not support it publicly. After a week of harassment, I changed my phone numbers and blocked all their social media accounts. I also hired a lawyer to send a cease and desist letter making it clear that further contact would be considered harassment. The legal intervention was effective, and the calls stopped immediately. In the months that followed, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Dad had qualified for experimental treatment through a clinical trial that covered most of his medical expenses. The family managed to keep their house through a loan modification program. Marcus had implied that they were completely without options, but apparently there had been alternatives to demanding money from the daughter they had abandoned. The experience of setting boundaries with my biological family and enforcing consequences for their behavior was transformative. I realized that I had been carrying guilt and shame that belonged to them, not me. They had abandoned me, betrayed my trust, and caused immense trauma, but somehow I had been questioning whether I was being too harsh in my response to their requests for help. Jake and I got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the Botanical Garden, where I had photographed my first wedding in Georgia. Mrs. Patterson walked me down the aisle since she had been more of a parent to me than my biological father. Sam was Jake's best man, and the guest list was filled with people who had supported and loved me through my journey of rebuilding my life. Our wedding photos captured something I had never seen in pictures of myself before: complete joy and peace. I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide them. I had built a family based on mutual love, respect, and support, rather than biological obligation and emotional manipulation. Jake and I bought a house together, using the money I had saved from my business. We adopted a rescue dog who became the subject of many of my personal photography projects. I expanded my studio and hired an assistant to help manage the growing demand for my work. Life felt stable and abundant in ways I had never experienced growing up. 2 years after cutting contact with my biological family, I found out through social media that Dad had successfully completed his cancer treatment and was back to work. Diana had reopened her dental practice. Marcus had found a new job with better pay. Kyle had made partner at a different law firm. They had not only survived their financial crisis, but appeared to be thriving. The irony was not lost on me. They had claimed to be desperate and without options when demanding money from me, but they had managed to recover and succeed without my help. It confirmed my suspicion that their request had been more about testing whether they could still control and use me than about genuine financial necessity. During this same period, one of my photographs was selected for a national magazine feature about small-town America. The image that launched my professional recognition was the sunset photo I had taken at the rest stop where my family had abandoned me. That place of trauma had become a symbol of new beginnings and personal transformation. Jake and I started trying to have children during our 3rd year of marriage. When I got pregnant, I thought a lot about the kind of parent I wanted to be and the kind of family environment we would create for our child. I was determined to build something based on unconditional love, support for individual dreams, and respect for each person's unique path in life. Our daughter was born on a sunny Tuesday morning, and I felt a completeness that I had never known was missing from my life. Holding her in the hospital, I understood for the first time why my family's abandonment had been so devastating. The bond between parent and child is supposed to be unbreakable, a source of security that allows children to take risks and pursue their dreams, knowing they will always have a safe place to return. Mrs. Patterson became Grandma Pat to our daughter, filling a role that she embraced with joy and enthusiasm. Sam became Uncle Sam, teaching her about art and creativity from an early age. Our chosen family provided all the love, support, and stability that our daughter needed to grow up feeling valued and secure. Now, as I write this story, my daughter is 3 years old, and my photography business employs 5 people. I have won regional awards for my work, and my images have been featured in national publications. Jake was recently promoted to principal at his school. We own our home, have savings accounts, retirement funds, and college savings for our daughter. By every measure, my life is successful and fulfilling. More importantly, I have learned to recognize the difference between family and relatives. Family consists of people who love you unconditionally, support your dreams even when they do not understand them, and show up consistently during both good times and difficult periods. Relatives are people who share your DNA, but may not share your values or commitment to mutual care and respect. The people who abandoned me at a rest stop were relatives who wanted to control my choices and punish me for refusing to conform to their expectations. The people who have surrounded me with love and support for the past 8 years are my real family, chosen rather than assigned by birth. Sometimes I drive past that rest stop when I'm traveling for work, and I feel a complex mix of emotions. There is still some sadness for the family relationships that could have been but never were. There is anger at the unnecessary trauma and struggle they caused. But mostly there is gratitude for the strength I discovered in myself and the authentic relationships I built from the ashes of their betrayal. That rest stop did not just mark the end of my relationship with my biological family. It marked the beginning of my real life built on my own terms, with people who value me for who I am rather than who they want me to be. Sometimes the people who abandon you are doing you the greatest favor of your life, even if it takes years to understand the gift they have given you. The lesson I hope others can take from my story is that family is not determined by blood relations, but by actions, consistency, and genuine love. You have the right to set boundaries with people who treat you poorly, even if they are related to you. You have the right to build your own definition of success and pursue your dreams, despite other people's disapproval. And most importantly, you have the right to surround yourself with people who celebrate your authentic self, rather than trying to change you into someone more convenient for them. What would you do if your family contacted you after years of abandonment asking for financial help? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because I read every single one, and your stories help other people feel less alone in their struggles. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about overcoming family trauma and building authentic relationships. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from the people who claim to love them. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that supports each other through difficult times. Remember that your worth is not determined by other people's ability to see your value, and sometimes the best thing toxic people can do for you is remove themselves from your life. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next video.